Hi Bella. Bella, this video will be for the cluster analysis, just to show you how to do or get started on that cluster analysis. So you're going to need a project. Now you will have all of these layers, so I'm not sending you any layers. You'll need to turn these on from the data that you have. And what we have here is we have the service area grid, and then what I've done is I've just used the filter. If you right click and go to filter, I have isolated cluster equal to RU13. So I've just isolated that cluster. Then the provincial boundary is not really necessary, but I've got them turned on. The households you will need, and then also the resource potential. Okay, so those are the layers you need to have added to a project to run through this basic cluster analysis. What we're going to do is we're going to use a couple settings. The maximum walking distance of 1.75 with the maximum pipe distance of 1000 meters. So our radius is going to be 2.75 for the service areas that we are going to identify. And then we need to calculate how many people are within those service areas. So we're not going to be bigger than 2.75. And then what we have here is we've got our resource potentials, orange, yellow, and green and blue. So orange includes red, so it's orange and red, and then yellow is a category on its own. Green and blue are a category on their own together as well. Okay, so what we want to do is we're going to create those circles or those service areas, and then we just need to figure out how many households are within those circles, and if there are too many households in those circles based on 5 people per household, we will need to reduce the size. So for orange, our maximum number of allowable households is 100. For yellow, it's 250. For green and blue, it's 750. And that is based on the type of pumps you can install and the yield that that resource potential will give you. Okay, so let's see what we're going to do and how we can do that using those parameters. Okay, so there are only really 2 things that are going to change, and that is the number of households within your service area and the resource potential. The limiting factor being our size of our circle, which is 2.75 kilometers. So what I want to do is I'm going to start off by creating a point file that I can then buffer to create my first service area. So I have a folder, and I'm just going to create a new shapefile, and you can create it any way you like. This is just going to be called new layer. It's going to be a point. I want to have it as UTM zone 35 south. It does not need a name. I'm just going to say OK. Go back to my layers, and then I'll just add it to my view quickly. There we go. And then I'll start editing, and I'm going to capture a point somewhere down here. It can have an ID of 1, and there it is. I can stop editing. Okay, so this is going to be my first service area, my maximum allowable service area. So I want to buffer that. So I'm going to say buffer. I'm going to buffer the new layer, distance of 2750. I'm going to use 10 segments just to have a smooth edge. And then we can create a temporary layer for now. Let's see what that looks like. And we'll just move it underneath the new layer. There it is. Okay, so that is fine. I'm happy with that. I'm going to create a permanent layer from that. Now, whether you save this in a geodatabase or just as a shapefile on your system is up to you. But this layer is going to be our clusters layer. So this is a test scenario for you. I want you to run through and see what you come up with for a cluster using the 100% coverage. And we'll discuss that briefly a little bit in a little moment. So I'm going to just make this a permanent layer. So I'm going to say right click, make permanent. I will save it in a random folder that I have. Where you save this will be completely up to you. And cluster analysis, I'm going to call this service area circle. Okay, so like I said, you can call this what you like. I'm just going to use that name just so that I know what I'm dealing with. And it is a shapefile. And then I'm going to say OK. And then that little icon should disappear. And I'm just going to rename this to the same thing. Okay, then what I will do is just color it up differently. So I'm going to open up my layer styling and I'm going to give it a hatch, and this purple works. So I think I'm going to leave that purple. I might change this to a different color at a later stage, but that is fine for now, and we can close that. Okay, so the other thing we are going to need to do is as we are determining how many households are per service area circle, we need to know how many there are. So I'm going to open up an attribute, the attribute table, and I'm going to create a new column, and it's going to be households, and it'll be a whole number, and that is fine for now. We can just have naught as the value and say OK, and we might add some more columns at a later point, but for now that is fine. And we can say save, just to save that. Okay, so now this is our default size, our maximum allowable size. I do not want to change this size of this original shape. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a copy of this shape and leave the original shape there, and then start populating or start trying to cover this cluster using 100% coverage. So let's see how that might work. So I'm going to start an editing session, use my selection tools, select features. I also need to turn on my advanced digitizing toolbar, and I'm going to create a copy. So this option here, copy and move, I'm going to click on a feature and then move it to cover this first portion of our cluster. Stop, and then right click to stop editing, and then we can save that, but we can leave it inside an editing session. And then the next thing we need to do is we need to figure out how many households are in this area. So we're going to use the count points in a Polygon algorithm, but before we do that, I want to use the layer labeling tool for service areas, and I'm going to label on a single label, but I want to use households, and it's going to be a text buffer, and I want it to be slightly different to what we've got there. So you can change the color slightly just so that it just stands out from the actual label from the cluster. So what shall we do? Let's make it, maybe make the text white, and we could make the buffer black, and possibly instead of regular make it bold so that it stands out. So there's a number for us. Maybe to make it a bit more distinctive, we can make the color yellow. Okay, so there we go. So now that is 0 and 0. So now currently the values for these two features in the households column is 0, and that's how it's being labeled, which is exactly what I expect to see. So the next thing we'll do, based on that size, I can zoom into this area because this is where we are going to start capturing new service area circles. Let's see how many households are within this first service area that we created. So I'm going to type in count points in a polygon. Now this is the little dialog that pops up. So the points are going to be the households, and we want a count field of households and modify features. And now that it has been updated, you will see that the number of households counted is 814. Okay, now according to the criteria that we set out, for green, we've only got a maximum allowable of 750. So we can go back and run that algorithm again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this onto my second screen, so it's on the right hand side, it's not closed down. I'm also going to change the rendering for the symbology so that I can see through these service areas. I'll make it 70 for instance. Let's say apply, and okay, so now I can see through it. Okay, so now we are just dealing with this service area. It is too big currently, and remember, we do not want to touch this one. We are going to use this one going forward possibly, so I want to keep that original size because this will be the service area that has the radius of 2,750 meters. So let's start with this one. So I select the feature that I want to adjust, and now the tool that we're going to use to change the size is called Offset Curve, and it's a very simple tool. You select it, you click on the circumference of your circle, and you can either type in a new value up here, or you can drag your circle smaller, and let's drag it to almost the size of the cluster. And now what we need to do, remember I've still got this dialog on my second screen. We can say modify features again, and it'll update. Okay, so now we've got 549 persons. Okay, so what we'll need to do is maybe adjust that, fine tune it. Now instead I can basically drag it off at a increasing size, but I'm going to start using the offset curve dialog here to add a 50 meters, and then once again modify features 579, maybe make that 100 instead. Modify features, we're getting closer, make it 100 again. Modify features 737. So what we can do is we can move this one slightly, just so that it covers or just intersects with the edge of our cluster, to something like that. Modify features again. Okay, ever so slightly too big. So what we'll do is just select the edge, and now instead of having an incremental value, we want to decrease it. So I'm going to go minus 50, let's say. That's minus 50 meters. Enter. Modify features 112. Okay, so you get the point, and you'll get an idea. So I'm just going to go up by 25 quickly. You'll get an idea of how changing the size of each of these clusters will affect the number of households that are included. So every time I click modify features, it updates. Okay, so now that is 5 more than the allowed amount. Now we can decide up front, and maybe this is something you can decide as a team. Are you going to specifically set it at 750 and then leave it there, which is maybe a wise thing to do. So maybe we just need to just make this smaller by 2 meters. Modify. Try again. Smaller by 1 meter. Modify. Nothing happened there. Smaller by another meter. Modify. 749. Okay, so I guess we could go up by half a meter, but that is under our allowed amount. Okay, so there we go. So now what we can do is we can save that, and we will create the next cluster, or the next service area. So we are going to use copy and move features. Now, looking at the density of these households, I'm going to stick with this size for now. Actually no, what I'll do is I'm going to use my original. So let's use this original one, and I'm going to copy and select, or copy and move, and now that is 100% coverage. And then I want to select that feature and modify all features and see what it comes up with. Okay, so we've got over 1,000 households, so we need to reduce that size quite significantly, and then use the move feature to position it so that you've got 100% coverage of your cluster. Modify feature again, 635, maybe we can go up by 100. Modify feature, up by 50, and we're going to need to move this slightly. It's starting to move over into our original service area, so we can modify feature again. Okay, so now we've got 830 or 803, so minus 20. Modify feature 792. Well, we need to come down a bit more than that, so minus 20 again. Let's say. Let's see how this affects it. Modify feature minus 20 again. Modify feature. Okay, I possibly need to say minus 50. Modify feature. Okay, there we go. A little bit too much, so we can go up by another 20. and possibly adjust the edge or move it slightly. So actually no, that looks good. So now we've got it under 750 once again, and now we can move into the new area. Okay, so you're going to do that for each of these new service areas. You're going to try and cover the entire cluster using the resource potential that is underneath, as well as the criteria that has been set out by that little spreadsheet, and the number of households that can be serviced based on the water resource potential. So I am not going to send you any spatial information. You should have all of this information. I will send you a link to this video, and then I'll also send you this little Excel spreadsheet so you can see what the household allowances are. And for instance, if you did happen to change the values, you can see how that might affect the number of hours that can be pumped, will affect the number of households that can be serviced. But at this point, we're sticking with 10 hours a day, and these are the solar pump yields. Okay, so take that spreadsheet, take these steps that I've set out for you, and see what you can come up with, and try and cover this entire cluster. You don't have to be, I mean, at this point, this is a methodology exercise. I want you to get used to the idea and see if you come up or have any errors. In areas that are more dense like this, you are going to get some issues. Let me show you what I mean by that. If we try and use 100% coverage there for this one, and then we update or modify all features, you can see that there are actually, it's more densely populated. So what you might end up having is you're going to have to reduce this quite significantly, modify features until you get to your value. And then let's just assume that that one's at the correct amount, or we can cover this portion of our cluster. Let's modify features again. Okay, that's still too big. This might be too small now. Yeah, way too small. So the density of households in the northern area of this this little service area are the problem. And so in that area, it would make sense that you would probably need a couple more pumps anyway. So if we have a look at what that might look like, if we have a pump here and its relative service area based on the households it can serve, let's just modify that. Also way too big, so now we can reduce that size right down, and we've still got 100% coverage. There is a big overlap, and this is something we will need to decide and discuss on ways around at some point, but at this point we're just trying to get the methodology right, and let's see if we can solve problems at a later stage. So you'll see that service area is quite a bit smaller because there are so many more households in it, and then you can keep moving forward like that. So use that model to create your service areas for this cluster. Use the count points in Polygon, and by using this count points in Polygon version, you can leave this algorithm window open and then just select the feature that you want to update every time, and then that will update that value. Okay, and there's just something you're going to need to use your own judgment with, and that is the point of the actual borehole. So if this is a uniform service area circle based on the position of the borehole, 4 pipelines and 4 taps, then the middle of the circle will be the point of the borehole. So now that is fine when you're working with areas like this. But let's say, for instance, you moved off, whoops, let's not use that one. Let's say, for instance, you moved into another area where there wasn't a uniform resource potential, then you would need to try and position the center of the service area circle over the resource potential that you are judging the number of households for. So for instance, in this case, you can see that in an example like this, the center of the circle, let's just turn that off. The center of the circle is where the 0 is, and that is pretty much your resource potential green. But had this circle been positioned slightly south, had it been positioned slightly south like that, then your resource potential is red, and that'll change the number of households that you will then set out as your limiting factor. So just bear that in mind. Try and position the circles on the resource potential that is necessary for the size of the circle and the households allowable. Now that won't, or you'll have to tweak it as you go. You're not always going to line up with the resource potential you want, and in those instances you're just going to have to adjust the size of your circle to suit the resource potential that you do intersect with. Okay, and that's how you do it. So let me know if that isn't clear. I want you to try and do a whole cluster and do it as quickly as you can. So sit down in a nice quiet space, make yourself a cup of coffee, and just go for it and see how far you get. Bear in mind that this isn't the end product. I'm trying to get you to a point where you can get a system that works for you as well, and then we can take that to the engineers or take that to John and see if that is going to be a workable solution using just a uniform service area circle. Okay, so that is it. Give me a shout if you have any questions. Cheers.